Our first talk is about the restoration of the Caledonian forest from Alan Watson Featherston. Here you are, Alan.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I think I may be the odd one out here because I'm going to be talking about Glenafric, which is actually not in northeast Scotland. It's in the Central Highlands, but I've been invited, so presumably there's interest. So I first went to Glenafric in 1979, and having travelled in other parts of the world, I saw what was perhaps the best example of a native forest in Scotland. And going there over the years, I began to see the forest was not in good shape. And that's what led me to found Trees for Life in 1986. But the Caledonian forest is the westernmost part of the boreal forest in Europe, characterised by Scots pine, but a range of other trees as well: birch, rowan, willows, oak and hazel in some better areas. But it's really the Scots pine is the backbone of the forest, which it's most associated with. And Scots pine is widely distributed all over the northern hemisphere, from Siberia to Europe. But in Scotland, we have a unique pine forest because we have no other native conifers in it. So it covered about 1.5 million hectares at its maximum extent, something like 4,000 years ago. But today we've got a tiny fraction of that left. And the name comes from Romans who called Scotland Caledonia. So there's a clue there that in Roman era, 2,000 years ago, the country was still covered in trees. Today, sadly, this is much of what the Highlands looks like, and all we've got left are the snags, the standing dead tines, and the stumps exposed sometimes in peat or just in grass like this here. So we've got a tiny percentage of the forest left. Gone with the trees are most of the wildlife that lived in the forest. There's no habitat for them anymore, and many of the crucial ecological processes essential to a healthy ecosystem are not functioning. Things like succession, predator-prey dynamics, and so forth. And human pressures are keeping the land in this minimal state of biological abundance and productivity. This is what most of the Highlands should be like. This is Glenafric. Some of you perhaps have been there. If you haven't, I strongly recommend it. It's a beautiful place. And you can see birches and pines here in autumn, and heather flowerings and understory, along with green, the blaeberries, typical shade-loving plants underneath the old canopy of the pines. And we've got wildlife probably you're all familiar with, things like black grouse, the crested tit, particularly associated with the pine woods. We've got the capercaillie. That was the last known capercaillie in Glenafric, photographed in about 1993 or 94. There was a cock there that was never seen with any females, and he either died off or he moved somewhere else in search of ones. And twinflower, another specialist pinewood species, quite rare as well. And we have a range of species. I don't have time to go into all of them here today. Various orchids. This is creeping ladies' tresses. And the pinewoods are particularly noted for their tooth fungi. Fungi which have teeth, not gills, on the undersides of their caps. And there's a group of 8 or 10 of them, particularly associated with the pinewoods. Many other fungi, of course, but these are the specialists. And amongst all our species, we have many of the interesting phenomena you might have seen from David Attenborough documentaries about the tropics, perfectly camouflaged invertebrates. And here we've got the caterpillar of a pale brindled beauty moth on the left, perfectly blending in with that stem of a young oak sapling. And on the right, there's another moth there, camouflaged against the bark of a birch tree. So we're just beginning to discover many of these things because the forest has not been greatly studied in the past, partly because there's so little of it left. And these are two specialists from Glenafric. Here on the left, this is the Inverness metalmark moth, and Glenafric is the only site in the UK where this has been recorded. It is abundant in other parts of Europe, but in Britain, only Glenafric. And on the right here, this is one of my minor claims to fame. I have a special interest in aphids. Sometimes people shake their heads at that because aphids are considered pests, but they're interesting species. This is a small hazel aphid, about 3 millimeters in size, and that's a parasitic mite. And I had to send that to a specialist in Poland, and it turned out to be an unknown species. So this is a new record for science in Glenafric in 2019. So just to summarise then, the picture on the left here, the map shows the approximate maximum extent of the pine woods about 4,000 years ago. And on the right, we've got what's left today. And the big clump is the cairngorms and so forth. So some of that just comes into northeast Scotland, I think. And Glen Affric is up here. This other cluster is Strathfarrar, Glencannick and Glenmoriston. So you can see there's a few outliers in other places. But the crucial thing is we've got small areas left, and many of them are isolated from each other too. So there's no opportunity for species to move between them. And the problem we've got, of course, is we've got too many herbivores. Sheep in many cases. There used to be 30,000 sheep in Glen Affric, but fortunately there's none today. But there's far too many deer. And deer are encouraged. They're fed by landowners in the winter so that they can be available for shooting in the shooting season. And they're forest-dwelling animals forced to adapt to treeless landscape in most places. Sometimes people don't know that what we call the monarch of the glen actually should be termed the runt of the glen, because our red deer are 40% smaller than those that live in Scandinavia, where they have a proper forest habitat. So too many deer have been eating every tree seedling that germinates and gets established, and you can see that pine was just about dead when I took the photograph. And that's been happening for 200 years. So the consequence of that is what I call the geriatric forest, the arboreal equivalent of an old people's home. Old pines dying of old age, and no babies, no teenagers, no young adults to replace them. We've got away with that for 2 centuries because the trees have been living, but now they're coming to the end of their lives. And I realized this in the 1980s, that something needed to be done, and that's why I started Trees for Life. Scenes like this evoke a great sense of sadness and loss. That's me standing there next to that one solitary pine. And of course, the return of the forest is also inhibited by muir burn. It happens every year for the benefit of people who want to shoot red grouse. The heather gets burned to stimulate new growth, and any tree seedlings that are there die as a result. So just to show you the impact of the browsing pressure, this is a particular group of rowan seedlings I've been photographing since 1992. And they were on a hummock. A bird had eaten rowan berries, perched on a hummock. The seeds had germinated in its droppings. And you can see over the years, it's unable to make any net growth. And in fact, the last photograph there, 2015, they're smaller in size than they were in October 1992. So that's symbolic of what's happening all over the Highlands. Have you ever noticed this, though? If you go to some of the lochs in the Highlands, there's dense tree cover and heather and blaeberries on the islands and nothing all around. It's because the deer and sheep don't go there. And I went to Norway a few years ago on a study tour, and Norway and Scotland were connected in the last ice age when sea levels were lower. Similar geology, similar soils, but they've had a different history. People left Norway voluntarily at the beginning of the 19th century to go to the States and weren't replaced by sheep. So the forest recovered. Unlike Scotland, where people were replaced by sheep after the Highland clearances. And you can see here, the difference between Scotland and Norway. Norway is further north, it's wetter, it's cooler, and the forest has recovered. The same thing would happen in Scotland. So moving on to restoration then, there's 3 key elements for me. First of all, you have to get the vegetation communities re-established, because everything else depends on those. The invertebrates, the birds, the mammals that feed on the invertebrates, the predators that feed on their prey. You have to have the vegetation first of all. You need to reinstate key ecological processes that are paralyzed at the moment: ecological succession, predator-prey dynamics, natural disturbance, nutrient cycling, all of those sorts of things. And then finally, reintroducing missing species, all the way up to and including top predators. So, after a number of years, I made a commitment in 1986 at a conference to launch a project to restore the forest. It took me 3 years to raise money, to make contact with landowners, because I had no background or experience in this, but I had a passion and a heart connection. And in 1990, I was able to fence off 50 hectares of land with the Forestry Commission, as it was then, now in Glen Affric. We put the fence up in an area where a survey from a student had shown 100,000 pine seedlings already there. Average age 10 years, average height about the size of this pointer. 95% had grazing damage. So the fence went up, the trees started to grow. I began photographing this particular one because it was growing out of a hummock. That's what I looked like in 1992. I still think it was a bit of a miracle the Forestry Commission, the government agency, worked with me, but they did. And you can see how this tree has grown. I photograph it every year. And that photograph on the right there was taken last September. And you can see the tree's about 7 or 8 times my height now. And it's become known as the champion pine because it's in my presentations, it's been on television, it's been in magazine articles, it's had a lot of attention. But this is the same area, and this to me is even more dramatic. This photograph on the left here was taken before the fence went up in 1989, and you can see a typical dying forest. These pine snags, because they have a lot of resin, can persist for decades without decay. And you can see on the right, again taken last September, that central pine snag is still there, virtually unchanged in all those years. That was a 35-year gap. The other 2 pine snags are also there, but you can't see them because they're hidden behind these young pines that have grown up. Nothing planted here. This is natural regeneration. This is how nature would recover by herself. The best way to get ecological recovery taking place. Since that first area, we moved into others. This is the National Trust for Scotland land, the headwaters of the Afric watershed. One of my former colleagues here. You can see inside a fence there, the post next to him. This was an eared willow bush taken 2 years after the fence went up. And then you can see how much that has grown there. Now, that's just one bush, but the significance of it is that all of these creatures were on that bush, feeding on it, because they have a habitat again. So you can see there's a caterpillar of the northern egger moth on the left. On the right, that's a parasitoid wasp, which specializes in laying its eggs in these caterpillars. And rather gruesome, the wasp larva eats the caterpillar from the inside and the adult comes out. And this is another invertebrate that induces galls, a sawfly in this case. So as soon as the vegetation recovers, you begin to get these species coming back because they've got a place to live. So natural regeneration is the best method of ecological restoration, but that only works if you've got a seed source nearby. Most of the highlands are completely treeless. So we also plant trees. And this was the first planting that Trees for Life ever did, 1991. And this man here has got a pine seedling he's about to plant next to this stump of a pine there. And again, photograph it regularly. You can see it's grown up here and there. But look at what's happened to the stump as well. Not only have the trees grown, but heather has grown up around the exposed roots of the stump, and on top there's blaeberries as well. I'm running out of time, so I'll have to go quickly. This is the same area. The fence here, trees planted inside. Outside just peat hags. Inside you've got blaeberry and heather in flower. And here you've got ecological succession taking place on the left of each fence. Heather on the left-hand photograph, and on the right, the heather then being colonized by young trees. That's the succession process from grass to heather to young woodland. And get the mycorrhizal fungi coming back, more invertebrates, that's on an aspen tree. And we've now got ospreys back in Glen Affric too. They were encouraged back to Scotland in the 50s, and now there's more habitat. They're back there in the glen. And of course in Scotland we've got our 2 missing mammals back. We've got beavers now and wild boar. And when you get species back, you get ecological relationships recovering. Wood ants tending aphids. And here, this is on Trees for Life's own property, a wild boar with a robin following them around. A well-known pattern of relationship from continental Europe. And you can see how close the robin was there. And in the absence of boar in Scotland, robins have had to adapt to a surrogate, gardeners. So just to finish then, some principles of restoration. Work from areas of strength where the ecosystem is closest to its natural condition. Pay particular attention to keystone species. That's Scots pine as a tree, it's beavers, it's wood ants. Utilize ecological processes, such as beginning with pioneer species and natural succession. Mimic nature wherever possible. Recreate ecological niches where they've been lost, leaving dead wood in the landscape, for example, or deer carcasses on the hill. Re-establish ecological linkages connecting the threads of a web of life. Control and or remove invasive introduced non-native species. Remove or mitigating the limiting factors that prevent recovery from taking place spontaneously by itself. Pay attention to species with limited ability to disperse. Aspen, wood ants, twinflower, they all have poor ability to disperse. Reintroduce species that can't return by themselves. Ecological processes I've touched on, predator-prey dynamics, nutrient cycling and so forth. Let nature do most of the work. Humans don't need to manage everything. Human intervention should be kept to the minimum necessary and designed to be inconspicuous as soon as possible. And finally, this is from my Findhorn background, what I call the green thumb principle. The actual heart connection and the quality of love that we bring nourishes all life. Parents know this with children. Pet owners know it with their pets. People with a green thumb know it with the plants. So let's all be gardeners with green thumbs, or actually green hearts, because it's the heart that makes the difference. And if anybody's interested, a commercial plug here, my wife and I run rewilding workshops in Glenafric, so if you want to know more, we've got one coming up in May and you can sign up for it. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Jo Gibb from East Lothian Climate Hub, and we're going to be hearing about the Healthy Hedgerow Restoration Pilot Project in East Lothian. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Here. Okay, just going to check which. Make sure it's going in the right direction. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. As you said, I'm here from East Lothian, so I've come a little distance, and I'm going to be talking about a pilot project that we've got going. So bear with me, because this is something that is new and I feel very excited about it, but we're still making our way with it. And so I'm just going to be sharing with you the thought processes that we've been going on with our journey with this to date. So I'm from East Lothian Climate Hub. We represent over 70 different member groups in East Lothian, and they requested or asked us They requested and asked us to focus some of our energies into looking at building a wildlife corridor or initiating the beginnings of a wildlife corridor in East Lothian. So we did a bit of thinking around this, talked to a lot of people about this, thinking about, well, where should we focus our energies with this? And what we came to was looking at hedgerows, and I'll be explaining why that is in just a minute. Hedgerows are a very natural, very obvious, very visual form of corridor, and that was one reason that we were thinking about focusing our attention on that. And they are also, because East Lothian's a very productive part of the country in terms of what it produces in terms of arable production. It's not taking away from any of the productive land, it's just restoring what already exists. So it's working with farmers and with the farming community. Added to which, hedgerows support a huge amount of biodiversity. So a study in 2015 found over 2,070 different species in just 85 metres of hedge. So hedgerow is a fantastic habitat for supporting our wildlife. And this just goes into a little more detail in terms of the different ways in which this kind of project hopefully will be supporting in different ways. So looking here in very sensitive. Looking here with the wildlife, it provides a fantastic habitat, as I've just said, provides lots of different food sources in terms of the berries, and great for pollinators in terms of the different flowers that you get available. And it is a brilliant linkage to different habitats, both in terms of the margins and linking to woodlands and to ponds. So it's a fantastic connector. But it's also brilliant for agriculture. So it's great in terms of keeping the livestock safe and contained. It's great for shelter and shade, which livestock will be needing much more of in the future. It's great for reducing soil erosion. It's great for reducing the need for pesticides, because the hedgerows provide the habitat for natural pest control. And it's cheaper than fences to install. So there's a lot of win for farmers as well. In addition to which, it's great for the environment. It's great for carbon sequestration, reduces the soil that can run off into waterways, so it reduces the soil erosion. It's great for mitigating flooding, which we're getting much more of. So the more hedgerow we have, the more it can absorb some of the the excess water. It's great in terms of being resilient to extreme weather and clearing toxins from the air, reducing the temperature. So it's great in terms of a lot of the adaptation that we've been talking about. It's really good in terms of putting things in place that we really need. So in East Lothian, certainly we needed to remind ourselves of what a good hedge actually looks like, because certainly, I don't know what it's like up here, but in certainly in East Lothian, we have lost a lot of our good hedges. So a good hedge would have a good mix of plant species that makes it much more resilient, and will make it much more resilient for pest control and not pest control, for disease and as climate changes. It needs a good height and width, and I think, again, we've forgotten how high a good hedge actually should be. So it actually needs to be much higher than we've got used to. It needs to be structurally complex, have good connectivity. So a lot of the hedges, certainly in East Lothian, are very gappy. There's a lot of gaps between them, and for them to provide that real corridor, we need to have proper connectivity. And we also need margins in our hedgerows. So going out, not straight into the field, but having tussocky grasses and brambles and different things, so linking into other habitats. It also needs to be dense to the base. So I've learnt a lot in the last month in terms of what a good hedgerow should look like. And since I've learnt it, I've thought, oh my gosh, we've got a big job on our hands in East Lothian, certainly. Because we need the foliage to come right down to the bottom to provide a really good habitat for nature, for our hedgehogs and lots of other different species. So we need the density right to the base, and we also need hedgerow trees. So interspersed in our hedgerow, we need trees to be coming up and forming new habitats, so that diversity of habitat within the hedgerow. So that's what we need, but that's what we've got. So the last survey, well, this is what I've been led to understand, the last survey was conducted in 2007, which is nearly 20 years ago in Scotland. And even then, we only had 1/3 of hedgerow in Scotland being in good condition, and I'm sure it's much less than that now. So the condition of what we have in Scotland is not in a good state. There's all the gappiness, the foliage is not to the bottom. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So one of the things that our pilot project is going to be doing is doing some surveying of what is existing, looking at what is existing. Initially, we were thinking, let's do lots of hedgerow planting, but now we're thinking, let's actually look at what exists. And so we're going to be, sorry, I'm very bad at using this. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the Healthy Hedgerow app, which is developed by the People's Trust for Endangered Species. And we are going to be working with teams of volunteers across East Lothian to go and assess and look at our hedgerow stock and look at what the condition of our hedgerow currently is. And that's very, very simple. It's just 5 questions that people have to answer on the app. And you can also get a paper version of that. And that will be helping us to look at what is the condition of the hedgerow at the moment. Working with farmers and doing that. We can't just go off and do it on any hedgerow. So we'll be working with farmers where they would like this to happen. And this will be informing farmers and informing the groups in terms of what is needed, what are the next steps that are needed. So in terms of what they will be assessing, what they will be looking for, they will be looking, this is what we would like to see. This is if the hedgerow was in good condition. This is what they are likely to see, to be honest. So over-trimmed hedges, or hedges which haven't been worked on at all, both of which are not in good condition. But what we would be looking for, what we would be hoping to see, but are unlikely to see, is the well-managed hedges, or where hedges have been recently rejuvenated. So what hedges do need is they need to be laid every 25 to 30 years, or coppiced to rejuvenate them. And a lot of that knowledge and the skills have been lost certainly in our county. So that's what people are going to be assessing and looking out for, and identifying what state the hedges will be at. And for us to do our work, we need to better understand what the hedgerow cycle is. So a well-managed hedge, Sorry, I'm really very bad at holding this. So a well-managed hedge would be going in this cycle, where you will be occasionally cutting it, not on a yearly basis, which often is the case, but be cutting it every 2 to 3 years. And you'll be cutting it at different sizes, so you're not always cutting it at the same level, so gradually it is getting bigger and bigger. And then every 25 years, you would be laying it. But those skills really have been lost in certainly in East Lothian. So every 25 years, you'd be laying it, rejuvenating that hedge. What hasn't happened is the laying and the coppicing, and then there has been often there has been overcutting, and that's where we have ended up with these kinds of hedges instead. And it's not really the fault of the farmers; it's the skills have been lost over the years. It's where the subsidies have been, where there hasn't been the attention on doing the management of the hedges. And the skills have been lost certainly in East Lothian. We just don't have hedge layers. We don't have people that know what a well-managed hedge should look like or how to manage a hedge. Sorry. So one of the things I was saying was we were wondering, do we put our attention in starting to plant new hedges, or do we focus our attention on our existing stock of hedges? And the conclusion that we have come to is that we will be focusing more of our attention on hedgerow restoration. So rather than planting lots of new hedges, we're going to be looking at restoring and supporting farmers to restore our existing hedgerow stock. We've got lots of amazing ancient stock, some of which, in other parts of the country might be 800 years old. That's amazing ancient stock that we need to rejuvenate and make sure that's going to really support a lot of biodiversity. So we need to get that ancient stock back and restore that. There's no point in planting millions of new hedgerow if we don't have the skills and the knowledge to know how to manage it. So what the pilot is looking to do is build up those skills and build up that knowledge so that we can manage our hedgerows better. And then we can look into planting lots of new hedgerow, but let's manage what we've got already. So in terms of what the pilot is going to do, we're going to be surveying the health of the hedgerows using the People's Trust for Endangered Species. We're going to be feeding all of that knowledge that we gain into the Nature Network map that's being developed in East Lothian, which is identifying where our wildlife corridors are. And we're going to be doing hedgerow restoration and doing some gapping up using lots of volunteers. What we've done so far is we've formed a biodiversity collective with a number of different groups across East Lothian working on biodiversity. We formed a hedgerow working group, and we have now started to build our knowledge. So we got an amazing lady, I highly recommend her, Megan Gimber from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, and she came and did a fantastic workshop with us on what makes a healthy hedgerow, how to maintain it and restore it, and how to survey using the app. We've then since then done some building of skills. So we've done a practical hedge laying session with the local countryside ranger, so building up skills of people so we actually know how to do our hedge laying. And we've been developing interest with local landowners, managers and farmers, so both through word of mouth and our existing relationships. And we had a collaborative event with the Soil Association and Nature Scot on whole farm planning. And looking at the whole farm planning, hedgerow is really, really important in terms of a number of different aspects. So this is going to be really supportive for farmers as well. So we've got about 5 farmers who've indicated an interest in being part of this pilot, because this is something we're all going to learn from together. And we intend to build teams of volunteers for hedgerow surveying from a number of different sources, both from our membership and the hedgerow group, but also from East Lothian countryside volunteers, we have got about 800 volunteers there. From corporates, from universities, from the community payback scheme, from schools. So we're being quite ambitious. We're going to see what happens. But we want to build a really good kind of almost army of a workforce that's going to be doing surveying. But also we're going to be skilling those people up so they can do the hedge laying and some of the gapping up as needed. We are not new in doing this. There are other projects. If you're interested in finding out more, there are other projects, particularly in England, that have done this. So the Hedgerow Heroes from CPRE are fantastic. There's lots of different projects around there. So I'd highly recommend you looking into them. And farmer cluster projects in the Central Chilterns have done a lot. So there's a lot of different aspects that we can learn from existing projects where they've worked in collaboration with landowners. Our outcomes that we intend to get from this project are surveyed hedgerows, so we better understand what we have, with the recommendations for management. We will have some hedgerow restoration in some key sites. We will have, through that, the beginnings of some better hedgerow highways and wildlife corridors. In doing all of this, we hope to really build trust and build relationships with landowners and land managers, because this is a mutually beneficial project. And we hope to build knowledge and skills in East Lothian. That's really, really important. If we're going to have restoration and good hedgerows in the future, we need to build those skills within our area, and build it not just with our existing volunteers, but really looking to build it with schools and younger people as well. And in all of this is about creating opportunities for local groups and volunteers to connect. So to connect with nature, to connect with each other, to connect with landowners and land managers. So people coming together and working together, because that's really, really powerful. So we hope to go from this, which is probably the best we've got in East Lothian, to be honest, and it's not great, and doing the hedge laying and the restoration so that we can get to this with better hedges. So thank you very much for your time.
Our final speaker of the morning is Lucy Cunningham from RENCAN Hub. Who's going to be talking about rewilding in Renfrewshire, restoring land and people.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy from RENCAN. So we're a bit further down in Renfrewshire, and we've been working on a project as part of our climate hub down there. So RENCAN is Renfrewshire Climate Action Network. We are working on various different aspects of nature restoration, and also we've got other aspects to the Climate Hub, like education and circular economy, carbon literacy training, but my particular part is conservation and food and farming. And I'd like to give a special thanks today to Alan, because without Alan, I wouldn't be standing here today. I have a 20-year-long career in conservation because I went on a Trees for Life week in 2003, and I loved it so much that I then went on to become a focaliser and became very passionate about nature restoration. And without that, I wouldn't be doing this now. So thank you, Alan. And I hope what I say can do justice to what he's taught me. So yes, part of our work down in Renfrewshire is looking at restoration of land. But we can't do that without looking at restoration of people, because Renfrewshire has a huge population of people, and a lot of them are at a serious disadvantage. So it's been my work to try and bring together the disadvantage of people who are disproportionately affected by climate change in particular areas of Renfrewshire, and the opportunities that exist for nature restoration on their doorstep. So a little bit about RENCAN. So we're one of Scotland's 24 climate hubs. We work under a charity called LEAP, which was a pre-existing environmental charity. So Renfrewshire's in the Central Belt, close to Glasgow, as some of you may know. And we only launched 6 months ago. We've done quite a lot in that 6 months. Luckily for me, it's been tree planting season. So that's nice. I did say to my colleague Svenja, when she approached me and said, would you like to start a climate hub, you know, this funding's available, and she's a PhD in climate science, and I said, only if I can plant trees, Svenja. I need to be on the ground. I've had enough talking about it. I've talked about it till I'm blue in the face, and I don't like doing that without taking action, you know. So I said, as long as I can plant trees, that's fine. So here we are. Svenja and I decided right at the start that we couldn't do anything without having a social justice aspect to it, because of where we live, because where we are in the Central Belt is there are so many disaffected people, there is so many issues, and we have to bring that in, we have to make that a central part of what we do. We're very aware that we're middle-class people engaging middle-class people, and that this is not a middle-class problem that we're dealing with. We're dealing with something that affects everybody and certain people disproportionately. So that's why we keep that at the heart of what we do. So Renfrewshire is that little red bit on the Scotland map, and here you can see a bit more. It's got the River Clyde comes through it, and a couple of tributaries, the White Cart and the Black Cart, come off of it. You'll know about Paisley, Renfrew, Erskine and Linwood, probably because of their industrial history. So we're quite famous for our industrial past. And a bit further over, you've got the shipbuilding as well, which a lot of these industries fed into. So it was very famous and world famous in its heyday for what it was able to bring industrially. But we now have the effects of that industry, which we are trying to deal with. And a lot of them have degraded land to such an extent that we are picking up the pieces. Yeah. So Renfrewshire happens to sit on, right, let me see, which one of these is the pointer? Is it the top one? Oh, it's the top one. No. Oh dear. Is it doing it? It's not doing it, is it? I'll just point, yeah, that's what they're for. So over here, this is the towns and villages of Renfrewshire. Down here, you're into Ayrshire, but up here, you've got Renfrewshire, but this here is the Clyde-Muir-Shield Regional Park. Now, it's largely ignored by the people of Renfrewshire. It is a huge area, 108 square miles at last count. This says 110, but it doesn't just cover Renfrewshire. There's parts of it in Inverclyde and parts of it also in North Ayrshire. But it's a massive area and it's very degraded peatland. So it was a grouse shooting estate for years and years. And because of that, it has degraded and been ignored, essentially. There are a few specialist groups working on it who we are now working with, that I'll tell you about. But it's very, very close to an awful lot of people, but not a lot of people have much connection to it. So an area like that would have had such a huge variation in biodiversity spanning a long time. So with we've got the lynx there, and we've got the wild boar here. Where is it? I did see that wee red dot appearing there. There it is. It just doesn't like the screen, I think. So, yeah, say 400 or 500 years ago, you've got wild boar and lynx would have been there. Back in I think it was the 90s were the last time the mountain hare and the black grouse were seen there. And there are regular ecological surveys to show that there's really not a lot, very much anymore. So this is the kind of restoration that we would love to see in the future, but we are at ground zero right now. There is not a lot going on. Peatland Action are doing a little bit over in Inverclyde. We've got a big bit, actually, knitting back together the peatland, which has been, the cuts that have come through the peat, they're knitting that back together. But they've been drafted in largely with contractors, and they're doing the thing, and then they're going to go away again, which involves nobody from the local area. There might be the odd digger driver, but essentially it doesn't really involve people. And to my mind, people are absolutely essential to restoring biodiversity. You've got a huge amount of people here. We're talking about 2 million people can access this area within half an hour, right? They could if they wanted to. And a lot of those people are very disadvantaged. So to my mind, it's very obvious we have to keep people engaged with nature restoration, because we know about the benefits of nature to people. We know what can be done when people access nature, when people, especially people who are disaffected and have a lot going on in their everyday lives, if they can be out in nature and doing something for something bigger than themselves. This is the biggest thing that I keep hearing back. It's bigger than me. It's great to be out of my own head. That's the thing that I wanted to tackle. So, yes, degraded peatland, a long history of drainage, the peat's dried out, and it's got a lot of potential for restoration. This is a drone survey that was done by Terramotion, and this is part of the Jernstein project. So the Jernstein project is a project working on Clydemere Shield, looking at what the potential is for preventing flooding further down. And there's a bit more to it as well. It's bringing people back to the land, but it's one of 3 niche projects working in Clydemere Shield, and there could be a lot more going on. That gives a number of the amount that is being, the potential of the carbon that is locked up in Clydemere Shield is almost £9 million, which is it's a crazy thing to put a number on, to be honest, because nobody's going to sell it. Well, not while I'm around anyway. But there's all these tons of carbon locked up in it. And the thing is, a lot of the carbon is washing off. It's so degraded, you see. So it really needs to have a lot of species brought back in order to save that and lock it in as it should be. This is SEPA data about the flooding further down. So as you can see, at the moment, the area around, you'll all be probably familiar with Glasgow Airport. So the area around the airport, crossing over the M8 and the A737, is due to be flooded completely. Completely. If you have a look at where that crosses over there, and then all these rivers and tributaries coming out, the flooding is due to be massive. It's quite low, the land there. But yet you've got this, which could be actively preventing the flooding further down. So the more planting that happens up there and the more restoration and the more letting nature take its course, the more we can prevent the flooding further down. And that is a very concrete thing to say to people who really want to get out of their own heads and who are involved with projects going, what am I going to do about my issues? How am I going to connect with something bigger than myself? Do you know what? You can really do something about this. That flooding can be prevented. Come and do the thing that helps prevent it. And it's an easy way to get people to come on board, because it's like, well, I can do something for my community. I'm up, I'm there, I'm signed up. So some of the data about multiple deprivation, not everybody in Renfrewshire has this amount of deprivation. However, we are have some of the most deprived communities in Scotland. When you're dealing with things like alcoholism and drug-related deaths and suicide all around, and people, relations in jail and relations with addictions, it's awful hard to remember the bigger picture about climate change and thinking about, what am I going to do about the state of the world? When you're trying your best to pay your bills. You know, you're trying your best to just make sure your kids are okay. And like the next time they go and visit dad in jail, it's going to be all right for them, you know, stuff like that. So with all that going on, restoration of nature just feels a little bit out there. So it's my job to bring that story to people and go, look, there's something that we can do. This is the flooding that's happening here. There's the trees we can plant further up. There's the nature restoration. Would you like to come and help? I've had a resounding yes. And the pilots that we've done have been incredibly successful. We've only been at it for 6 months. So these are guys from the STAR project. The STAR project is in Paisley, and the guys that have been coming along, a lot of them are ex-gang members. So people who've been drawn into situations that's what's happening around them, you know, and that's what seems attractive to them. And they end up getting drawn into things that bring them into the criminal justice system, and then that affects their ability to get a job later, etc., etc. Giving people something like this to do, to get out of their own heads, has been incredibly effective. And everyone who's come along wants to come again. So we did a pilot with STAR where we had 10 trips out, and what we did was provided support workers, money for support workers, which they had already. They had a trust relationship with their support workers, and the money for transport, for buses, and some lunch. And me, giving them the explanation about this is how it works, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to go, and here's the map, and here's the thing, and a little bit about climate change. And as I say, I've just had a fantastic response to it. And we've been out, and it's been very gung-ho, let's get them planted. But none of this would have happened without this group. So some of you might have heard of IA. IA is Gaelic for aspen, and IA do the era tree planting charity, and they started because apparently there were 4 aspen left in Renfrewshire at one point about 15 years ago. 4. So Peter from EA said, I've had enough of this, and I'm going to sort that out. And he set up a nursery at Bishopton on the MOD land. Thank you. And so we link in with them, and they do all the logistics. They have a tree nursery. They have tools and equipment. They cover the first aid, although I also do a bit of that. And so all of that is taken care of. So we can focus on the people and putting them together. These are some of the groups that we've taken out. So as well as working with EA, we work with the park themselves. We also work with the Friends of Clydemere Shield and the Jernstein Project. And these are some of the groups. So Kairos is a recovering women project. So women who've left abusive situations or who are in recovery from drug use. The Tannehill Centre is a place where there's lots of different projects involved, but specifically drop-ins for recovery groups. Pachidu, ethnic minorities, people who come together from different countries, mostly in Africa. They've all been out planting and they've worked with us all. And the Health and Social Care Partnership send us people, send us links to groups who then want to get involved. So, yes, as I've said, we are the glue. This is what we do. Environmental groups that we work with need volunteers. There's a huge area of degraded land which needs restored, and we help to put that all together. That's our role in this. A few pictures of what we've done. It's not all planting trees. As Alan says, you have to be sensitive to exactly what's going on where you are. So on the particular part of Clydemere Shield, we'll be looking at, okay, what actually needs done here, and EA oversee that. So that's us taking off tree guards. That was some hedge restoration, and that one at Clydemere Shield Visitor Centre. We did that around the centre because a couple of people had disabilities, so we couldn't take them out yomping up a hill. We had to find a space that worked. Again, in partnership, we did that. I think that's the video. Sorry.
The symbol of our project.
Video about Clydemere Shield.
We've chosen it as Jernstein means the Eagle's Rock. I've been working in this area for over 20 years doing survey for different developments. It's not unusual to come and sit on a hill around this area for 3 and 6 hours and see absolutely nothing, not even a crow. The ultimate aim of the Jernstein project is to bring together a diverse group of people from the local area to get them all working towards a common goal for everyone's benefit.
But everyone's becoming more and more informed about these big issues, which is climate change, biodiversity loss, are the 2 biggies affecting us all. We feel, well, things are really bad, but there's great potential for improvement.
And it's much the 3rd generation unemployed single mother in Kilburnie. It's as much her place as it is the person who's riding up here on a £3,000 mountain bike, and it is. But it's how do we bring those things together?
We in the Jernstein project firmly believe that if we can bring this landscape back to life and bring the bog back to its best, that it can hold water, then it would slow up the water coming down off the hill, and it would give people a better chance of even mitigating against flood on these occasions.
You don't inherit land, you borrow it from your children. So we all have to look at our farmland and say, this is something we must leave for the next generation, we must leave it better. But the most valuable thing that we've got on the planet is soil. And if you continue to go about farming in the wrong way, then we've only got 50 seasons left, so it's time to waken up and start thinking this soil is one of the most valuable assets the human race has got.
It's a possible achievement. Basically, it's in everybody's interest to do so.
Well, that was an interesting video. I promise you it was a lot more exciting when I uploaded it. I think you got the same thing 4 times there, but you had a few people from the Jernstein project that I mentioned speaking there. And the last guy was the only regenerative farmer that we have in Renfrewshire. And he was speaking about, regenerating the soil as well. So there's key people on side, and we hope to take the communities around Clydemere Shield with us as well in the restoration of that land. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
I have a question for Joe about hedges. Going back to the late 1950s, I started managing hedgerows on my dad's farm. We never ever laid a hedge. All we ever did was top cutting and side cutting. And these hedges were all broad-based hedges. So there was a hedge, and there would have been, well, in the 1950s, there would have been about at least 3 yards of low ground vegetation on either side of the hedge. So my concern is we're applying the principle of hedge laying universally to hedges where they're not appropriate, bearing in where I think they may not be appropriate, and especially bearing in mind what Alan said about let nature do the work.
Thank you. I'm still learning about this myself. This is something that I was gaining knowledge on in the last month from the People's Trust for Endangered Species. So I'm interested to hear that, and interested if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards as well in terms of your own knowledge, because that will help us build a good project. To my understanding, the hedge laying or coppicing it's not something you do on a regular basis. It's something that you do every 25 to 30 years. So it's just to rejuvenate the hedge every now and then. And then the rest of the time, like you say, it's letting nature do its work. Once it's laid or once it's coppiced, then it's letting it rejuvenate itself and then just giving it a trim every 2 or 3 years, so not interfering too much after then. That's my understanding. But if it is more complex than that, then I'm really interested to hear that in terms of making sure that we do the restoration in the right way, and if hedge laying isn't appropriate in certain circumstances, better understanding that. So I'm really happy to talk to you afterwards about that. Yeah, if that's of interest.
Question there, I think, was slightly faster.
Yeah, just to continue on the hedges, I'm Irish and I come from a part of Ireland that has very dense hedges. And like Ewan says, we never, as I grew up on a farm, we never did the coppicing either. So I think it probably comes back to the traditions of the area. But my question was, and by the way, in Ireland, it's now illegal to cut a hedge between the 1st of March and the 30th of August. Yeah. Which could be something we could learn something from.
It's the same here. Yeah, it's the same here. Yes, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's well known here.
Yeah, I probably should have made that very clear. Yeah, no hedge lay, and as I understand it, the best time to do any hedge laying is January, February. So you give the birds the best amount of chance, really.
But my other query stroke, and it comes to both, but all three of you really, is around the pesticide use in arable land at the moment, which I'm just in the middle of reading Silent Earth by David Goulston, which basically talks about the level of pesticide use that's ending up in hedgerows, and that actually is not, and the soil is clearly not good at the base of hedgerows, and you basically are killing off the insects, and the level of biodiversity that can be in those hedgerows is very much reduced. So I think there's something around working. You've got some of the farmers engaged clearly in some of your projects. I think it'd be really interesting if that is demonstrated more about how we can actually lobby farmers to not do to that level of pesticide and overuse, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just to respond to that, I think it's a really important point, and I think certainly from the hedgerow perspective, having that buffer between the hedgerow and the actual field would be really important. But yeah, it's a good point. Thank you. Sorry.
Does anybody else want to respond?
Well, I don't have much to say on faces.
Move on to question here then.
Hi, thank you. Is this on? It should be on. No. Technology, it's not doing me. Okay, thank you. Hi, I've got a question for Alan. I am very excited to be in the room with Alan because I remember when you founded Trees for Life, because I was working for Scottish Natural Heritage at the time. And so this is really very exciting. But my question is, what would it take to be able to take those fences away?
Well, there's two aspects to that. One is the trees that are either regenerating or have been planted are above browse height. and that's anywhere from 5 to 15 years, depending on the conditions that they grow. So that's one thing. That will enable those to grow, but the bigger answer to the question is we need to get a natural balance again between vegetation recovery and browsing pressure. Because if you take the fence down and there's just as many deer, they may not kill the trees, but they're going to eat all the blaeberries, the heather, the understory, and you basically get another geriatric forest in 200 years' time. So it's about the recovery of trees inside a fence is the first stage of the process, as I hope I indicated. But what we have to do is get back to a natural balance, and that's why I always advocate the return of predators like the lynx and the wolf, because until we get those back, we're going to face the same problem repeatedly.
Thank you.
Question there in the front. Yeah.
So I have a question about kind of you're all engaging people in your projects in different ways, and I'd just be interested to hear what barriers to accessibility, maybe just an example because I'm sure there's many, but barriers to accessibility of those projects you've identified and how you've addressed them.
So the biggest barrier to accessibility for us is money. So people are too busy. The people that we're trying to work with, the most disadvantaged people, are really too busy dealing with what's right in front of them. You know, so if you've got a certain amount of money, you're going to be spending it on the basics. You know, it's like this issue, it's not unknown, but it's really not in your sphere of particularly influence. You know, it's not something that you think you're going to go and do something about because you're far too busy just trying to feed your kids, you know, and get through work as well as be able to pick all the kids up and, you know, all the things that you need to do. There's just so much, there's no bandwidth left for bigger issues like this. So there's the money side of it and there's the bandwidth side of it. But we're trying to solve it, or we're trying to go some way towards that, is working with projects who are already providing support. So to bring people at a disadvantage out into nature, instead of trying to speak directly to people themselves, we're going via projects which have already attracted people for different reasons. So we'll go there, we'll speak to the projects and we'll say, can we speak to your people about this project that we've got going on? And so they've already got a trust relationship with the project, and it's not like some, you know, climate change adult middle class person parachuting in to go, I've got funding for a whole year, so I'm going to change the world and you're going to come with me. You know, I'm really super aware of not doing that. So yeah, going through people who they already have the relationship with has been really helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. One last question there.
Thank you. A comment first and then a question. I think one of the problems with hedges is the amount of green plastic tubes we're using, the tree protectors. Anyone who knows Aberdeen and the road structure, we've got the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, and we've got 1.4 million plastic tree tubes. And I've asked numerous times, and no one knows how to dispose of them. And no one can give me a question as to how they're going to dispose. But the situation you're seeing with the tree hedges, you put a tube on, you always get a lollipop head. You don't get that lower growth. So that's one of the big problems while we've got distorted hedges. But my question also is aspens. How important are aspens? I've been following your social media, Alan, and I've planted lots of aspen, but I've failed miserably in trying to take seed or get them to grow other than from a bought-in sapling. Thank you.
Oh, I could speak for hours on aspen. Aspen is very rare in Scotland now because it hardly ever flowers, and because it has either a tree is male or female, it doesn't have the two sexes on the same tree, it very rarely produces seed. So it's become scarce. It's the most palatable tree of all, along with rowan. Deer will eat it before anything else. So it's disappeared from all but the last remote outcrops of rock and gullies and so forth. But it supports a unique range of flora, of fauna, lichens and invertebrates. we, Trees for Life, we started planting aspens back in the early 1990s with a view to creating habitat for beavers, because aspen is one of beavers' favourite trees to fell because of its wood. Woodpeckers use aspen in preference to other trees because they can excavate their nest holes more simply. And there's a whole suite of specialist organisms, invertebrates. There's pinhead lichens, a millimetre in size, that only occur in aspens. So it's really important, and it's disproportionately rare in Scotland today. That picture I showed of Norway, if you remember in my presentation, there was a Scotsman who led that tour in Norway, Duncan Halley. Some of you might have heard of him. And in talking with him and local land managers there, I could see aspen was everywhere there. And I said, well, how's this? Because in Scotland it can't spread. Oh, it flowers and spreads all the time in Norway. And the theory is that because aspen is so palatable to deer, the deer have preferentially removed the trees that flower and seed. And the only trees that have survived are the ones that preferentially reproduce by root suckering. And that's what we've got left. And that's the whole population in Scotland has become distorted because there's a natural variation within aspen between suckering and flowering. And that is part of the issue. So we should have much more aspen, and it's very important for a whole range of species.
Right, well, thank you very much for this morning's speakers. It's been really, really interesting. This is lunchtime, and one thing to note is that the vegetarian and vegan food will be on the left. The rest of you will be against the windows, and the gluten-free people will be fed individually.